Morning, everybody. This is Wouter Vanhoudt speaking. Also, Joël Nieve is together with us. We will be both moderating this session. Because we have many attendees, we have put everybody on mute, and we will not unmute the participants because there are simply way too many and it would become a cacophony. So what we will be doing today is actually, first of all, going through an introduction of GEOL schemes. Then I will be talking about CertifHy Phase 1. So that's a project which happened 2014, 2016. That should last more or less till 1020. At that moment in time, people will be allowed to ask questions. So you can see in normally in the tool, there's a session where you can use chat. Feel free to type questions in. Joël will monitor those questions and we will display the ones that we will be treating. So Joël will try to make a synthesis of the questions that will be asked so that we don't treat 3 times the same question, but also taking into account the limited time that we have available for this Q&A section. He will make a selection. So please, in case not all your questions are being treated, bear with us. I think these are the most, so after the Q&A session, I will also tell about CertifHy Phase 2. Also, this is a project that we're doing currently. That's all about the pilots. I will explain what the program is, where we currently are, discuss some or give at least an overview of some of the discussions taking place right now and how we see the rest. So that will last till about 10:45, and then again we will be having a Q&A session. So also during the second presentation, feel free to send your questions into the chat, and we will pick them up. And then we're going to try to end this first webinar by around 11 o'clock. Okay, good. So I'll start right away. So many people have been asking us what are guarantee of origin schemes, and I always like to give an example from the renewable electricity world, which you can see currently on the slide. Typically, electricity, once it's injected into the grid, it's impossible to distinguish whether an electron is from renewable nature, from fossil or even nuclear origin. It's impossible to distinguish. That's why people has created a guarantee of origin scheme. So the attribute or the certificate of an electron that was injected of being renewable, it's a separate piece of paper that it's traded independently from the electricity markets. Okay. And this instrument has typically been used by energy suppliers throughout Europe to be able to offer to their customers renewable electricity contracts. So whenever that a consumer subscribes to such a contract, and they consume some megawatt hours of electricity, the energy supplier will purchase the corresponding amount of renewable electricity guarantees of origin on the guarantee of origin market and cancel them. And this proof can be submitted to the consumer, and therefore he can trust that all of the electricity he's been consuming to have been of renewable origin. On the right hand side, you can see an implementation that has been done in Flanders by Flanders regulator of electricity and gas, and households are able to type in their electricity contract number. So here you will see my example, and I can immediately see from the bar that 100% of the electricity I've been consuming, that it was of renewable nature. That means my energy supplier have been canceling the right amount of guarantees of origin. And so that's what's happening into renewable electricity geo markets. Is this the only market where we have geos? No, we see this also in sustainable palm oil, and there they've been imagining different kind of geo schemes. So I'll try to go to slide 4. And the different ways of making your certification schemes work is the first kind of scheme we could imagine is what we call identity preserved. This means that sustainable palm oil is coming from a single identifiable certified source, and it has its dedicated supply chain. So one kind of ship, one kind of refinery, and one kind of packaging line. The great advantage of having such a system is that it allows to create quite a lot of consumer trust, because the label can say this sustainable palm oil is coming from this particular sustainable plantation. So it gives a lot of trust to the end consumer. But it of course means that the supply chain is very expensive. A second way how to deal with certification, it's what we call a segregated supply chain model. And this basically means that you are mixing the output of several sustainable plantations into one ship, one refinery, and one packaging line. This allows for some supply chain optimizations, of course. However, the label that you put on your end product should be slightly different. You should say that the sustainable palm oil is coming from one of a particular group of sustainable palm oil plantations, and we can't tell you exactly which one. So we lose a little bit of consumer confidence, but we gain supply chain optimizations. One step further is what we call the mass balancing system. And in this case, we can mix the products from both sustainable plantations and conventional plantations. And what's good about it is that it increases the efficiencies throughout the supply chain. And when we package the product, because we know how many products are coming out of the conventional palm oil plantations, we can do a checksum. So we should track all of the inputs and all of the outputs of the system. Okay. So again, this is increased supply chain and certification system efficiencies, but the label cannot state that the product is coming from a sustainable plantation anymore, The label can, for instance, claim that by buying the products bearing a label, that you are giving a financial support to those plantations who are functioning in a sustainable way. And then one step further, there's also a book and claim system where we are not tracking the product anymore that's coming from conventional plantations, which is of course a huge advantage from a sustainable, from a certification and a supply chain point of view. However, you're missing your checksum in the end. So this is the system that finally has been elected by sustainable palm oil certification bodies because it's the most efficient certification scheme and the less costly. But it is depicted on this particular picture. So the bill of having a completely segregated supply chain would be too high. In the case of hydrogen, we've been going as well for this latest book and claim system for two reasons, or for multiple reasons. First of all, hydrogen can be injected into a hydrogen grid where multiple sources are being used. It can be green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen, all injected into the grid, just like electricity, and therefore it's impossible to distinguish the molecules that will be coming out of the grid. Hydrogen can also be transported through road via tube trailers, etc. But this supply chain can become fairly complicated to track and can go into the hands of multiple actors along the value chain. So also the physical supply chain can be hard to track, and therefore the book and claim system was chosen. I think this is somewhat of the basis of geo systems, and maybe in a brief introduction therein. So now I'll try to go deeper into the CertifHy project. So the first phase of the project happened between 2014, October 2014 and October 2016. And it was financed as a grant project under FP7 by the Fuel Cell Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. In that phase, we had two main goals. Is first of all to understand what an EU-wide geo scheme would look like, investigating what is the European regulation to which geo schemes should comply. We've been investigating biomethane and renewable electricity geo systems to see what worked well, what were maybe the difficulties that they faced, so that we would be able to learn from them. And we've been investigating into detail how hydrogen geos can be working in a world where renewable electricity and biomethane geos are existing, because at all price we need to ensure that there is no double counting. And when renewable electricity geos are used to produce green hydrogen geos, we must ensure that those renewable electricity geos are being cancelled properly. So that was one of the goals. The other goal was to come to a widely acceptable definition of green hydrogen. Okay, that was the second goal. I think that was very important because we saw throughout Europe many different definitions appearing, and when there are different definitions being used by different producers, it creates a lack of confidence at the side of consumers. I always compare it to buying bio chicken into the supermarket. When all of the labels of bio chicken are different, I get somewhat of a weird feeling, and I have difficulties comparing the product and the prices. It would give me much more confidence if all of the labels would be exactly the same. Okay. So we've been able to achieve those goals. In phase one, we've been collaborating very closely with quite a lot of industrial players. You can see the logos on the slide, but we've also been reaching out quite a lot to policy makers, as well as people of civil society, NGOs, etc., to make this phase working. And the approach was really a consensus building approach. So all of the results of the phase one have been tested, talked through with industry, policymakers, and NGOs. It does not represent the opinion of the project team. Okay. So what has been achieved? So this was actually the work program. The consortium was made up of HINICIO. We were project leader. We were a strategy consultancy company with more than 10 years experience in the field of hydrogen. We've been collaborating with LBST, which we consider to be a German sister company. ECN is the research institute of the Netherlands, which has currently been merging with the TNO, and TÜV SÜD is, I think, a well-known audit and certification company. Okay, so this was the work program. I won't go in details on the work program. I think it speaks for itself, but let's focus on the results. So this slide actually depicts that during the entire process, we've been elaborating on quite a lot of different versions of what is green hydrogen. So quite a lot of effort has been put into it. And finally, we're very proud that we achieved a very good consensus with all stakeholders. A consensus with all stakeholders does not mean that everybody is 100% aligned, but I guess this is the way that Belgians tackle compromise in general. Okay. So what is the definition that came out of this period? It's that first of all, green hydrogen should be of renewable energy feedstock. So that's the green box that you can see on the graph. But the second criteria has been put on this green hydrogen. People said that they want to have renewable hydrogen, but not at any carbon content. So basically, there's a certain carbon intensity limit put on green hydrogen. Okay. That carbon intensity is 60% lower than the benchmark, and the benchmark process is steam methane reforming of carbon capture. Steam methane reforming of natural gas. So we're doing 60% better than the benchmark process. We believe that in reality there will be two types of green hydrogen appearing. It's first of all renewable electricity coming from hydro, wind and solar to be used for electrolysis. And typically, the greenhouse gas intensity of that hydrogen will be zero. It's zero because according to European convention, hydro, wind and solar electricity have a carbon intensity of 0 grams of CO2 per megawatt or megajoule produced. I repeat, this is by European convention. In the reality, there are very minor carbon intensity linked even to wind or solar electricity. Typically bio-based pathways will have a certain carbon intensity linked to it, and within the industry, policymakers and civil society we've been contacting during phase 1, they said we should not skip on this potential. Okay, so that's for the green box, and we were planning to put a lot of effort on the green box. However, there was quite a lot of industry who said to be interested in the blue box as well, namely hydrogen produced from non-renewable origin, yet to be low carbon, because they could potentially be imagining that this blue box would come at a lower price than the green box. And certain industry, for instance, industry under ETS, or other industry who needs to decarbonize under the Fuel Quality Directive, they are more oriented towards carbon reductions than towards renewable uptake. We've also foreseen that over time the carbon intensity limit could be reduced. So that's something that we will have to agree upon in the future. So so first of all, how will we calculate the renewable content of hydrogen production? Basically, renewable hydrogen will be as green as the energy input into the production device. Suppose that we have biomass input on the one hand, electricity input on the other hand, which could be in part renewable and in another part non-renewable. You can see that 77% of the input is renewable, hence 77% of the hydrogen being produced will also be renewable. You can see that the pie chart on the right hand is smaller than the pie chart on the left bottom, because of course we have some conversion losses. So efficiencies are taken into account in these calculations in an indirect way. From a greenhouse gas emissions, I'm here depicting what's the scope of the LCA analysis, and I guess it's already answering to quite a lot of questions I see appearing into the Q&A. So what's taken into account, it's not only the emissions produced at the level of the production device, but also all of the upstream emissions. Okay, so that's, I'll give an example. In the case of steam methane reforming of natural gas, we take into account the emissions which are linked to the exploration of gas, the refining of gas, the transportation of gas, as well as the CO2 emissions within the steam methane reformer. So this is the CertifHy scope. This also means that we exclude the emissions which have been linked to the building of the production plants or even the exploration plants. To give another example, in the case of solar electricity and electrolyzers, the CO2 emissions linked to the production of the PV panels and of the electrolyzers are excluded out of the system. Also, in our case, we are working on a guarantee of origin. That means that we stop at the system boundary of the production device. And for us, the specifications of a product that can be commercialized means it needs to be 99.9% pure and at 30 bar pressure. We know that there are certain electrolyzers that are having an output pressure at atmospheric pressure, or for instance at 10-15 bar. Well, we have to increase the greenhouse gas emissions linked to having another compression step, for instance from 15 bar to 30 bar, and there we will be providing some default values. We know that many people are interested in complete well-to-wheel calculations, and hence storage compressions needed for transport and final dispensing will have to be included. Well, this is excluded out of the scope of guarantees of origin. I think currently the scope of our project is already very ambitious to make this happen at the European level. But we know that there are certain actors in the field which are using CertifHy as a first building block to demonstrate carbon intensity and renewable content up to the point of production, and then they make their own certification schemes to go towards the point of sales. Okay. So the next slide is an example of quite a lot of different pathways which have been already scrutinized. So it's hard to read, but vertically you can read the processes of electrolysis, steam methane reforming, either small ones on site or big ones centrally, gasification and byproduct with quite a lot of different energy inputs. And you can see that the first dotted line that you can see around 91 grams of CO2 per megajoule of hydrogen. This is the benchmark process, SMR of natural gas. 60% lower is the low carbon intensity threshold that I presented beforehand. And you can see that already quite a lot of processes are not eligible anymore. So this threshold is already put at an ambitious level, especially for all bio-based processes. When we would put this threshold even lower, most of the bio-based processes would be excluded. Okay, you can find a very good overview of the scope of all of these LCA results, as well as the end results, on the CertifHy website. So this website is certifhy.eu. However, the detailed LCA calculation is not a public deliverable. Good. So we had a very good endorsement. I'm sorry. And there something's been going. We're back at the presentation. So we had a very good endorsement of these definitions and in general the CertifHy scheme. But you will see later onwards in this presentation that in the meantime our stakeholder forum has grown. So we also had a consensus on what the geo scheme should look like. I think the most important thing to remember is that it's very similar as to renewable electricity geo schemes. We've been inspiring ourselves on the Association of Issuing Bodies, which is managing the renewable electricity geo scheme through the EECS, the European electricity certification scheme. And it basically means that there's a decoupling from the molecules, from the attributes that can be traded separately. I explained the reasons before in the first part. And there's also a consensus on what are all of the stakeholders that needs to be involved for a geo scheme to be working. Typically, it's competent authorities, accreditation bodies. Those are typically mandated at European or member state level. They're going to give accreditation to auditors and certification bodies. And then typically there's also an issuing body and a registry, which in a lot of cases are state mandated. Voilà. So what are the business models that are possible through these GOs? I'm going to give two more slides, and then we'll prepare for Q&A. So in the left-hand side, you can see a scheme or a world where there is no geo scheme available, which means that every single hydrogen refueling station would need a dedicated supply chain. Suppose that hydrogen refueling station 1 does not have any green hydrogen source in its vicinity. It would mean it would probably not get access to any green hydrogen, because simply there would not be any economics to transport from a distant green hydrogen source up to the hydrogen refueling station. It's not good from an economical point of view, but also from a carbon intensity point of view, from the point of production till the HRS. It would increase the CO2 content. Okay. Should there be a geo scheme, and now I'm talking on the right-hand side, and there would be a virtual geo market, it could mean that also hydrogen refueling station number 1 could procure green hydrogen geos and could offer them to their consumers. We of course need to make sure that the green hydrogen that's being dispensed in both hydrogen refueling stations is not higher than the amount of green hydrogen being produced in production device number 2. So this is one of the examples of how geos can be used to create business cases. And the second example I would like to give is that in the case of green mobility, it's still not clear who will be the actor within the value chain that could ensure its customers to receive green hydrogen. And so in case number 1, the role might be taken up by a hydrogen supplier. He would be delivering, for instance, 50% green hydrogen to the hydrogen refueling station. In case number 2, it could be the HRS operator who is buying gray hydrogen from the H2 supplier, but he is operating as an HRS operator directly onto the geo markets, and he could be procuring green hydrogen geos on behalf of his consumers. This is more or less the same model as renewable electricity contracts that are offered to households in the electricity domain. It's the final energy supplier which is ensuring its consumers to receive renewable products. There's also a case 2B where we could imagine that there is an on-site electrolyzer and the HRS operator is also producing its own hydrogen. And that hydrogen could be, for instance, partly linked to a renewable electricity plant and partially coming from the grid. But it could also be fleet operators, and that's case number 3, which could ensure that the hydrogen that's being refueled in its fleet to be of a green nature. And you can compare that to big companies which are having as a corporate choice that they want to decarbonize all of the flights that their personnel are taking. And they can buy certain products to offset the CO2 emissions of all of the flights of their personnel. It can be done by being active on the geo markets. And last but not least, we could also imagine new business models appearing where car OEMs are leasing vehicles to their customers, including hydrogen, and why not to assure to their customers that also this hydrogen to be of green nature. I'm not saying it's an existing business model, I'm simply showcasing that the mere existence of GOs are enabling quite a lot of business models to operate. And with that presentation, and also to save a little bit my voice, I'm going into a Q&A section, and I think that Joël will list the questions that we will tackle. So the first question is on is from all hydrogen produced from the regular share of nuclear in the grid is automatically low carbon. Not really automatically. Technically, how it works is that you need to have a look on the electricity bill that will be provided to you by your energy supplier, and if that bill indeed mentions a high content of nuclear, it would make that electricity low carbon, non-renewable. Okay. We are aware within the consortium that nuclear electricity is not socially accepted in all European member states, yet in some it is considered to be a non-renewable, low-carbon and virtuous source. What we are striving to do as a consortium is to make a tracing and a tracking system from all kinds of different hydrogen, and personally we don't give any value or we don't decide on behalf of certain member states which pathways they should support or not. But I will be given, if time allows, at the end of this session, I will be able to give a couple of clear examples of pathways of what can be considered green and what can be considered non-renewable yet low-carbon hydrogen. Oui. Will hydrogen producers be able to gain financially from trading green hydrogen GOs? But I would say yes, this is of course the purpose. If there is a GO market, there should be a value. There should be a value attached to it, and typically in a market, the value is determined by the crossing of demand versus supply. Currently, we believe that in the case of renewable electricity GOs, the price of GOs is still very low. I think the price of those GEOs were low, because when the system was created, there was a huge oversupply of GEOs. I don't think we will have a huge oversupply of green hydrogen GEOs at the start. On the other hand, the price of renewable electricity GEOs have been increasing over years, and currently we saw the first offshore wind parks, those tenders being won in the Netherlands without any state subsidies, and I think the extra revenues they're counting on are coming from GEO markets. So I hope that will have answered the question. Next question. So who issues GEOs and who verifies that the carbon intensity of that green hydrogen is indeed low enough? So the CertifHy, so our project in phase 2 is working on a set of procedures on what needs to be audited, and typically it will be the green hydrogen producer which will be inviting an auditor like TÜV SÜD, Bureau Veritas, Vinsot, whatever, to come and validate both the renewable content as well as the carbon intensity of its hydrogen production, for instance, of the last year. That auditor will make an audit report, send it over to a certification body that's typically appointed and mandated at member state level. In the case of renewable electricity markets, that's sent to VEA, which is the Flemish Energy Agency. They are acting as an accreditation body and rubber stamping that audit report. They will send it to the issuing body, which in the case of Flanders is Flanders Regulator from Electricity and Gas, and they are maintaining the registry. And then multiple people, both GEO producers as well as traders and potential GEO users, can create an account linked to that registry. Then it works like in a normal bank account where you can do transactions. Next question. Will hydrogen GEOs be able to be cancelled voluntarily for anyone, for example, on behalf of a hydrogen user with no CertifHy account? Yes. So and this is also typical of what's happening in renewable electricity GEO markets. It's the energy supplier who is cancelling GEOs on behalf of residential consumers. Operating on the GEO markets, it's typically too complex for persons like myself. So I count on my electricity supplier to do that for me. And again, as I shown on one of the first slides, maybe tools can be developed by the issuing body, like Flemish Regulator of Electricity and Gas did, where I can enter my hydrogen supply contract number, and to see that indeed 100% of the hydrogen that I've been consumed, that my hydrogen supplier has been purchasing and cancelling the right amount of GEOs. It was my understanding that the CertifHy is considered to be a booking claim where no physical connection is necessary. How does that comply with the motto physical hydrogen comply? Does that also mean that I have an end consumer are able to buy a hydrogen GEO even though I've not done any consumption? Yes, you can buy hydrogen GEOs if you have an account, but you should not cancel them and that will have to be validated if you're not consuming any hydrogen. So only hydrogen consumption can, in the physical world, can lead to hydrogen GOs being cancelled. Can I inject green hydrogen from wind power into the gas grid, generate GOs, and let them cancelled by HRS operators? Typically, there are two possible scenarios in this case. Either you inject your hydrogen as green hydrogen into the gas grid. At that moment in time, that green hydrogen dissolves into natural gas, and basically you should cancel your green hydrogen and request for green biomethane GOs. That's option number one. Once that's a green hydrogen GO and used as a green biomethane GO, it should not be reused anymore as green hydrogen GOs, because otherwise you would do double counting. However, you can also inject your hydrogen and say it's gray hydrogen that you inject into the gas grid. That means you're still keeping your green hydrogen GO, and you could potentially sell that to somebody else. And this is also what's happening in the case of renewable electricity being injected into the grid. People have the option of either selling that as a gray electron and selling the green electricity GO to somebody else, or they can inject that electron as renewable electricity, but it also means that they can't sell it a second time to somebody else. I will now take the last question. The last question maybe. I think the system has slight delay. What are the requirements for proving the green attribute for the electricity input used for the green hydrogen production? Is this only standard electricity GOs, which would also allow green hydrogen production in fossil-based electricity systems? Or are a higher environmental criteria applied, example, long-term contracts, PPAs with renewable power plants? Well, both systems are possible. So either you can use electricity GOs, because this is European regulation. Any consumer is allowed to use a GO of renewable electricity to claim that its electricity consumption has been renewable. And other people will indeed apply higher environmental criteria and go into power purchase agreements with renewable plants. So our green hydrogen GO system has to comply with existing European regulation on both renewable electricity as well as biomethane GOs. Okay, so far the questions. I see there's quite a lot of interest. Thank you for this. And we'll go straight on into phase 2. So currently, what are we doing in phase 2? So this contract started in 2017. It's supported by the European Commission through the fuel cell hydrogen joint undertaking. And the first goal that we had is to have more stakeholders involved as compared to phase 1. So we really built a large stakeholder platform. Secondly, we are translating all of the documents of what a scheme should look like into standard operating procedures, documents, etc., that will be shared with everybody. We are going to test all of those documents, scheme, principles and procedures in a pilot, and then we're going to learn from that pilot and define what are the actions for an EU-wide deployment. Okay. So the consortium, it's the same as during CertifHy phase 1. It has been enforced by a company called GREXEL. GREXEL is making software that is being used by quite a lot of issuing bodies in different member states for the running of the registry, but they've also been key in the design of the European Electricity and Certification Scheme that's been acting through AEB, and this is basically the renewable electricity geo scheme as we know it today in Europe. And so they've been helping us, they've been helping creating that system. So they were also able to provide a lot of know-how. On top of that, they are also having products to run biomethane geos schemes, and they're performing the role of an issuing body within different member states. So they're a good actor to reinforce our team. So what is our project about? So the first thing that we did was create a stakeholder platform, and because our focus remains to create consensus with everybody, we split up the platform in 4 working groups. Working group 1 are specialists on geo schemes and procedures. Working group 2 are typical hydrogen producers, both the incumbents as well as the new players. Working group 3 are people who could be using geos, so either traders or hydrogen consumers, being it hydrogen refueling station operators, being it equipment providers to those stations, being public authorities who are having bus fleets, steel, ammonia industry, etc. And working group 4 are more of the specialists with regards to regulatory. Because of course we need to ensure that whatever we do, it's in line with current regulation, for instance, the current Renewable Energy Directive, as well as with upcoming regulation. And I think everybody is aware of discussions that are taking place right now on the next phase of the Renewable Electricity Directive. Those are being discussed within Working Group 4. So that stakeholder platform will run till the end of the project. Work package 2 was all about specifying the production pilots, as well as preparing quite a lot of scheme documents. In the next slide, we'll go into detail. Then in work package 3, we've been preparing those pilots. That means that audits have happened into production plans. We are discussing the very normal questions, doubts, problems that are boiling up if you're doing such a thing for the very first time. And we are right now solving all of those problems. Whenever that's solved, the GEOs will be created. In the meantime, an ICT registry has been adapted, and everybody in the stakeholder platform should already receive an invitation to create an account into our registry. So whenever the GEOs will be issued, they will be ready for trading, and we're gonna run this pilot, so trading to be happening as soon as possible till the end of January 2019, which will allow us in work package 4 time to plan for the potential rollout. Okay. So what are all of the scheme documents that we prepared? So first of all, the issuing criteria have been developed together with the hydrogen producers. For instance, how do we allocate carbon intensity of a production batch if there are multiple feedstocks, if there are multiple end products? So we're also dealing with more difficult plans. I'll give an example right away. We've already been developing quite a lot of procedures, which you can see in yellow. So how GEOs needs to be issued, how production devices can be registered, how we can organize for GEO transfer between several account holders, etc., etc. Those documents are all available on CertifHy website, certifhy.eu. Okay. So which are the pilots that are producing GEOs currently? We have 4 pilots. On the right-hand side, you can see a project in Belgium and one in Germany. In both cases, there's a renewable electricity plant connected through an electrolyzer. That's the case for the Colruyt Group in Belgium. And in the case of Uniper in Falkenhagen, the electrolyzer is both grid connected as well as to a renewable electricity park. And they also have, they're installing currently a methanization unit, so they can also convert the hydrogen by mixing it with biogenic CO2 into CH4. So we will be able to test how green hydrogen GEOs can be converted in biomethane GEOs. We can test what happens if you inject hydrogen as gray hydrogen into the grid and trade the GEOs, the green hydrogen GEOs on the GEO market. Quite an interesting cases to be developed from a business case perspective. On the left-hand side, you can see 2 other pathways. So this is Air Liquide is having a steam methane reformer installed in France with a carbon capture and utilization unit. And I see the slides are already changing for me. My apologies. A slide disappeared. So this CCU does not make the hydrogen renewable, but it will make it low carbon. They also have the possibility to procure biomethane GEOs or to use biomethane to produce both renewable and low carbon hydrogen, being green hydrogen. And the last plant, it's a joint project by AkzoNobel and Air Products in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. It's a chloralkali electrolyzer, and in this case AkzoNobel is entering into a power purchase agreement with an offshore Dutch renewable electricity wind power plants. So definitely some people are using other sustainable electricity criteria to prove their green hydrogen. These are the pilots. The stakeholder platform has been elaborated and is rather large right now. I'm not going into details on all of the logos. You can have a look at this presentation afterwards. But I think it's fair to say that we have a very good representation of actors along the value chain. And I must say that we're very satisfied with all of the interaction, the feedback that we are receiving from all of the stakeholder members, because this is really enabling us to think of all critical aspects and to build a much stronger consensus. Okay. So the GEO scheme, it's being endorsed by Working Group 1. This is one of the outcomes of the project so far. I'll let you read the content yourself. This is more the governance rules of a GEO scheme. All of that is being made available on the website again. Certain issues are still to be addressed, like what is the lifetime of guarantees of origin? Because on the one hand, when an auditor passes by, you are and you've been using renewable electricity, you are linked to the GEO lifetime of renewable electricity. On the other hand, hydrogen is a gas, it's a storable product, so should the lifetime be longer, but longer lifetime of GEOs, it could potentially create an impact in the beginning on having a higher supply than a demand, which might impact the GEO price negatively. So there's still quite some interesting discussions taking place. Another discussion within Working Group 1, and here it's Working Group 3, the GEO users should have already provided quite a lot of content. It's what's the exact content on a GEO that should be provided. If we would provide a lot of detailed GEO information, it would lead to having a lot of choice for potential consumers. However, it would make the system much more complicated. It would also mean that the entire ICT would become more expensive. And on top, it could have an impact on market liquidity. If you would be able to select with the highest level of detail exactly what kind of hydrogen you want from what kind of electricity produced in what kind of month, it would mean that every single GEO would be less liquid, and this of course has an impact on pricing and potential success. I just mentioned these examples to give you already a hint on the complexity and all of the potential impacts we are trying to take into account. So these are all of the schemes that have been, all of the procedures that have been developed so far. So you can also see that some of the procedures like sanctioning device holders or GEO correction have not been implemented yet because they've not been deemed crucial for the pilot phase. But towards the end of the project, of course, we need to come up with ideas. Okay. This is a very clear example of the procedures that we've been developing. This is, I think, a typical flow chart that we developed. And so we've been developing as well as part of the pilot preparation quite a lot of case studies with a brief description of the pilot plant, how many GEOs they are expected to issue during the pilot, a production process diagram, what is the exact device boundary, and then how we will apply the CertifHy criteria on past production, on a production batch level, etc. I must admit that the two most complicated cases are both the steam methane reformer of of natural gas with CCU, how to allocate the CO2 reductions over the different products of that steam methane reformer. And because it's a HICO unit, that means it's producing both hydrogen, CO, as well as heat, CO2, and steam. And in the case of a chlor-alkali process, we also need to determine an allocation key to allocate the CO2 to the different end products. And there typically, are you going to use a mass balancing approach? Hydrogen is very lightweight as compared to chlorine. You can also use energy-based allocation mechanisms. But what is the energy content of chlorine? This is the kind of discussions that we're having within working group 2 at the moment. So I'll give you a flavor of the case studies that have been developed. So in the case of Colruyt Group, there's both an alkaline as well as a PEM electrolyzer, and there is storage, and there is a fuel cell, and somewhat further there is a hydrogen refueling station that is used for either their forklifts of Colruyt Group. They've got a big fleet of fuel cell forklifts, but they will also have adjacent to their distribution center a hydrogen refueling station that will be made public, and Colruyt will be offering to their customers only green hydrogen. That also means that all of the hydrogen, green hydrogen GOs they will be producing, they will also be consuming it on behalf of their customers themselves. So this is more or less what the process diagram looks like. On the picture you can see already a first hydrogen station that they have available with the orange vehicle, but there will also be another public station opening, I guess, in September. This is what a process diagram, what it looks like, just to give you a certain flavor. This is what they expected to produce. As already mentioned before, Colruyt has made the strategic decision that all hydrogen they will offer for hydrogen mobility will be 100% own-made green hydrogen, and that means they don't make any GOs available to the market. Okay. This is a typical production device in the case of an electrolyzer. And this is typically the kind of use cases that we are making. So this one, I will go a little bit in detail. So you can see that, I hope you can read it, that on the left-hand side, we are calculating which are the carbon intensity of the electricity produced, and typically the electricity consumed is separated in two boxes. It's the electricity that's coming from the grid, or to be more exactly from your electricity supplier, minus the electricity with all of the GOs that has been purchased, and that determines the mix of electricity coming from your electricity supplier. And then the box below is all of the electricity that's been purchased in megawatt hour, together with the emission factor of that electricity. If you combine both aspects, you have the carbon content of your electricity, and if you divide that by all of the hydrogen that's produced, then you get the hydrogen footprint. Okay. This is a little bit simplified, but I think it explains in detail how it goes. Also, in view of time, we'll move on a little bit faster. So I will not go into detail on the Uniper case, saying that there is a power to hydrogen unit. I already mentioned there's also a methanization unit. This is a process diagram. So they're able to inject hydrogen either as hydrogen or as CH4 into a natural gas pipeline. The process diagram, it's already a little bit more complicated because there's also some compression, and also as in synthetic gas can come in. And then this is what the flow charts look like. But I think if you go through them yourself, I think they're fairly self-explanatory. Okay. Okay. So that's about the pilot cases that we are setting up. I would like to mention that this is some snapshots from the EICT infrastructure that has been modified for CertifHy. It's based on renewable electricity GEO scheme, and you can see on the down right box, you can see the link with all the information necessary on how to create an account into the GEO system. I already saw also popping up some questions with regards to the RED 2. Yes, we are having in working group 4 with all of the regulatory and advocacy people who are following the RED 2. We detected quite a lot of issues. For instance, the definition of green hydrogen has not been mentioned in the RED 2. Is that a good or is that a bad thing? Now we need to take into account that the RED 2, it's a directive that is only enforcing certain requirements on a limited amount of potential hydrogen users. Right? It doesn't cover all of hydrogen usage for refineries, which is mainly determined in the Fuel Quality Directive. The RED 2 is not determining which action needs to be taken by industry under ETS and so forth. So we are having a deep look at the RED 2, and it's very important that our scheme is compliant with the RED 2. However, we take into account that we want to make an EU green hydrogen GEO scheme for all potential users of those GEOs. And those discussions in working group 4 are advancing well, and every single version of the council or of the parliament of separate hearings are being tracked and are being discussed internally to prepare to adapt our program in line with where the directive is going. Not only do we screen all of this to make sure that we are compliant, we also see the new Renewable Directive as a moving target, and we are able to provide our input towards the policymakers to make sure that the RED 2 is also in line with the necessities of green hydrogen GEOs. Next to the RED 2, we also have a link with standardization, more specifically Sensenelec TC6, called Hydrogen in Energy Systems Working Group 2 Guarantees of Origin, where CertifHy is a very important source of input into this working group, but working group 2 through Sensenelec standard procedures, it also allows for an even wider consultation process to ensure that also member states are able to have its say before it will become a full-fledged standard. This is some slides depicting that there's quite a lot of discussions taking place to see how we should frame this hydrogen geo scheme within existing regulation, existing standards. But I think this is too detailed for this presentation. So what are the key issues coming up? So we're really finalizing all of the issues brought forward by TÜV during the several audits. Another workshop will take place, I believe, on July 2nd or July 3rd within Working Group 3. Mainly the results of the chloralkali electrolysis plant will be discussed. Once those issues have been cleared, those GOs will be requested to be issued towards GREXEL, and GREXEL will take over the role of issuing body during the pilot, and those GOs will be up for trading. And then we're trying to work hard within Working Group 3, and this is one of the reasons for doing also these webinars, to make sure people are aware that these GOs are available and that we can find potential users to test this scheme. So in that respect, I really call upon everybody present in this meeting. Feel free to create an account. Feel free to come in contact with the potential producers. We can give you their contact details. Just send us an email on certifhy@hinicio.com so that we can really experiment on the trading, the using, etc. I think the most interesting period for the users is about to get started. Well, so that's again where we are today. What will happen afterwards? So after in 2019, I think we should prepare for a rollout with the elaboration of the procedures. Also, those procedures could potentially have to be adapted as per the RED 2, that most probably will be set in stone by then. We need to find the proper actors at all levels, so competent authorities, accreditation bodies, issuing bodies, and regulatory operators for this geo scheme to function. And most probably we'll have to build and operate an adapted and made-to-measure ICT registry, create more social awareness, maintain the stakeholder platform, ensure convergence with RCS. So today it's RED 2, but there's also a gas directive coming up, and I think that's an important role for the future. Well, and by this, I'm going to open to the Q&A session, also in view of time. So, Joël, feel free to launch the questions. Big projects are presented, but the scheme is also available to SME projects. What is planned to small pragmatic green hydrogen projects? But I personally think that we opened the scheme to everybody. I think you can say that Air Products, Air Liquide are the big industrial gas company and the incumbents. AkzoNobel, for sure, it's not an SME, but they are a rather new party within green hydrogen production, even though they've already been in the hydrogen business for quite a while. Uniper, I think it's also a split off, so it's not an SME, but it's at least a new party. Colruyt Group is also a new actor. And And if you can see, many of the electrolyzer companies like Hydrogenics are involved in those projects. So definitely we want to make systems that can cater also for SMEs. And that's a typical trade-off to be made. On the one hand, in your audit procedures, you want to make it robust, you want to make it credible towards end consumers, but on the other hand, you need to ensure that the administrative burden on neither SMEs nor the incumbents becomes too big, because it will only mean extra costs to the scheme. And that's something that we need to strive for. Next. Can current green hydrogen producers take part in the pilot scheme? But for the pilots, so we already did the audit of 4 European production units. So those will be the only units during the pilot. Okay, so and we will share the results with any producer. So if you are a green hydrogen producer and a European company with a European footprint, feel free to become member of working group 2. They will share their results with them. Next question. A very relevant question. So indeed, we see many initiatives popping up left and right to define, having people define themselves what is green hydrogen. But we're having close ties with, for instance, the people in France. So that's the French Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. Currently, there's also a mandate by their minister to develop a green hydrogen certification system. So that's both the Directorate General of Environment and of Economy which are involved. So we're having close links to them. TÜV SÜD has a green hydrogen standard in Germany. Whenever this pilot will be completed, they also are proposing to translate their own certification scheme into the CertifHy scheme. People in the Netherlands, also at ministry level, they're really taking up the CertifHy principles in Benelux as well. So clearly, we are trying to build an EU-wide consensus. We're doing quite a lot of outreach, but if you are willing and capable of helping us to reach out to the right policymakers, please do so. Because we can't do all of the work on our own. We need to have ambassadors telling their policymakers to co-develop a European scheme rather than to do something in their own corner. Otherwise, we risk to have the same result as with biomethane, where a lot of member states have been giving early support to biomethane, which is a fantastic thing, and many local GO schemes have been developed. But now that there are so many different GO schemes at member state level, it will still take years to harmonize them at the European level. Next question. Very relevant question. So, and this is typically something that Working Group 4 will look into in great detail. How can the CertifHy scheme, which intends to be a European-wide scheme, get access to renewable electricity and biomethane GOs, which are operated at member state level? And how can EU-wide green hydrogen GOs be used to potentially also be converted into renewable electricity and renewable methane, and people might want to create, to convert their green hydrogen geos into biomethane geos and renewable electricity geos. So this is something that the working group 4 is looking into in great detail, and we also created a proper link with the High Law project of Hydrogen Europe, which is looking at all of the barriers at member state level for hydrogen energy. So it's being looked into, but it's work in progress. I do not. Do you anticipate that your scheme will be binding on an MS level at a certain point? I did not receive the mandate, the consortium did not receive the mandate from the European Commission, because in the end it's the European Commission through the fuel cell hydrogen joint undertaking that given us our mandate. They didn't request us to make something that's binding at all member states. Rather, we are trying to make a tracing and tracking system, and we leave it up to either the policymakers at the European level to decide what they want to make binding, or to have industry push its policymakers at MS, at member state level, to make it binding. But it's not up to me to share my opinion, and I don't have a crystal ball to anticipate what will be happening in the future, nor what's playing into the minds of policymakers at European or a member state level. However, I can assure everybody that it is our objective, our goal, and our ambition that should they be willing to implement such a system, that the outcome of our project will enable them to implement a complete tracing and tracking system. I keep on repeating to people that we are developing a full back office system, but it's industry and policymakers that will decide how it will be used. Next question. Very good question. I can see this person is very active in asking questions. But personally, I think that green hydrogen geos, just like renewable electricity geos, we could imagine forward contracts on geos, which also means that it could be a support on getting your money right now for potential green hydrogen production in the future, and therefore helping on the bankability and the financing of your current hydrogen production device. But this is, I think it can be of assistance, but how it would exactly work, I consider to be out of scope of our project. Next question, please. But typically when you end, so what is expected from working group members? Typically for such projects, the more input you give, the more you're able to shape the scheme. And the more we can be aware of your constraints, your worries, your necessities. I can say that working group 4, for instance, I think they've been gathering via webinar on 4 occasions in the last 6 months. I think the intensity of their conversations will depend on the amount of versions and amendments that are made on the Renewable Energy Directive. But I think typically a session every 1 month and a half is can be foreseen, and then it's up to you to determine how well prepared, how much you will arrive in that session, how much feedback you want to give. We also will be sending around quite a lot of documents, of course. We ask them for review. Some people decide to have more of an observatory status than an active participation. That's also allowed. So you will be determining yourself the input you will be giving in that project. Next question, please. Yes, it will be made available for later reviewing. This is also why we are using this new software tool. And in case we've been struggling with the software, our apologies, but the link will be made available on certifhy.eu. Next question. And I guess we're going to go to the last two questions right now. Is blockchain get a role for your hydrogen geo scheme? It has been thought of, and quite a lot of investigation has been done into this. We see blockchain is definitely a technology that could be thought of. However, we also hear that there's quite a lot of worries on social acceptance with regards to blockchain technology. Typically, the mining of Bitcoin is done in countries with very cheap electricity supply. That mainly means fossil-based electricity, and so Bitcoin as a system has a very high carbon intensity. I know there are other blockchain technologies available which can lessen the carbon impact, but it's one of the things we need to take into account, but we didn't come to a final conclusion on this one yet. And then the last question. Is hydrogen from green methanol reforming considered green hydrogen? As you see from our scheme, we've been trying to implement, we have been implementing a technology neutral definition of green hydrogen. If you can showcase that your input has been, your feedstock is from renewable nature, and the carbon intensity that's linked to that renewable share is to be below the low carbon intensity value, your hydrogen will be considered to be green. So we are technology neutral. We don't give any advantage to any technology whatsoever. However, more efficient conversion processes will of course have lower carbon intensity per megajoule or per megawatt hour allocated through it. And I think this was the last question, because this is also the end of my voice. I would like to thank everybody for all of your questions. I think we're also going to try to make a Q&A of the questions that we saw popping up, maybe trying to bundling them on the one hand, and referring to the proper set of documentation that you can find online on the other hand. I think that Q&A will take quite some time, so I apologize if it's not being put online directly. However, this webinar should be put online as soon as possible. I guess it will take a maximum 48 hours. And please be aware that we also be introducing or having similar sessions like this. Actually, the next sessions will be repetitions of this one, because not everybody was available on these dates. And you will find on the certifhy.eu website, there's already a wealth of information available. Thank you very much. for your time. I must apologize that I don't give anybody else some speaking time, but currently with 67 attendees, it would really be a cacophony, and on top, it would not be very democratic, because this tool only allows 25 people to speak at the same time. But thanks a lot for your time, and I hope I've been able to clarify certain aspects, and hope to see you popping up in some of the other webinars or physical conferences